All right, everyone, let's get started with the event. Starting off, we have the keynote session done by Jonathan Walters, a seasoned professional with over 25 years of experience in the technology industry. As the global manager for the corporate office at Managed Technology Services, he has successfully led numerous global projects, demonstrating his strategic leadership and project management skills. Beyond his professional achievements, I shouldn't forget to say that Jonathan is also a passionate individual with a variety of interests. He enjoys cooking, sailing, and is also a skilled pool player. I'm confident that you all will have a great time learning from him. So please join me in welcoming Jonathan Walters to talk about future work models and flexibility, which is a super important topic in today's world. Jonathan, over to you.
Thanks, Avi, for that wonderful introduction. I'm grateful to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. Just bear with me for 1 second. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my presentation. Okay, so building a future-ready workforce with emerging technologies. What a great theme for this conference, and I'm grateful to everybody for having me here. So just a little bit of background. Obviously, my name's Jonathan Walters. I'm based in Brisbane, Australia, so it is early evening for us. Married with 2 teenage boys and a wonderful dog that keeps everybody in line. I've been in IT for nearly 30 years. Done a host of different roles over that time. I guess, I was fortunate enough to be in Sri Lanka a couple of weeks ago, meeting with the Bistec team when I was approached to do this session with everybody. And it dawned on me when I looked around the office that there's probably at least 75% of the people I saw that probably won't remember the foundations of where we came from and where we are going in terms of technology and future work practices. So I will start this session just to give everyone an overview of the agenda. So just a brief introduction to the topics that we'll be discussing, some future work models around what's possible, what's being thought of, benefits in terms of the flexibility of using those models and the challenges that come with them, and then some future trends and something for the group to consider as we go through. So that said, let me start with the introductions. So there are a couple of links on this slide to a couple of interesting, fun topics that you can click and go to, but I might just start with the foundations of the traditional working model that many of us over the years would have been exposed to, and that is very much that office-bound, physical place where we would go and work 9 to 5. 9 to 5 is a little bit of an illusion for us in IT, but that's the foundations of where we've come from. We're used to having sat in cubicles or at fixed desks and the like. Obviously, there is a slight deviation to the same theme, and that would have been around shift work in the early days, where groups of people would still go to a physical location for set periods of time in order to do work. And that's where we've traditionally come from. Along the way, we've had many business challenges and many technology challenges that have drawn us to future work models. And those are the models that I will talk about today. The four in particular that I'll talk through will be remote work, hybrid work, shared office space, and the idea of a 4-day week. Now, I suppose just to give everybody a little bit of fun, or at least some thought around this, back in the early 1980s, there was a wonderful country singer called Dolly Parton who sang an amazing song called 9 to 5, and it was really a foundation of the world that we lived in and the way work was conducted. Now, for those of you who are too young to remember the 80s, you might know Dolly Parton as the I suppose what's the word? She's the godmother of Miley Cyrus. That might help fit the gap in the demographic that's on this call. So just talk about those business challenges briefly and then the technology challenges. So the business challenges that we've always faced, I guess, are one, being able to find the right people to work with us, to work in our organizations, to support the business and the activities and actions that we're trying to achieve. The technology challenges essentially are born from what the world's capable of at any point in time. So what I might do, if it's okay with everybody, is I will skip to the next slide and I'll talk about that history of technology as a starting point. So back in the 1900s and probably even just before, the world, or at least the office world, was founded by the idea of a typewriter. This probably, for all extensive purposes, might have been considered, the first word processor of sorts. People would type on those devices quite impactfully in order for the keys to make contact with paper. Obviously, we had telephones. Now, for those of you that may or may not remember, phones used to be hard cabled into a wall. You couldn't walk very far with them. And they were analog, very much, a manual dialing system. In the 1980s, or more so the late 1980s, the personal computer came into offices and started to replace typewriters, or at least what was there at that time. And the first of the, I guess, mobile technologies being a pager, which was a device that allowed people to be contacted with a very simple text message of, who the caller is and what the phone number is to ring back, was made available. As we moved into the 1990s, specifically more the middle to end of the 90s, the internet became quite prevalent. And the first mobile phones, I don't know how many of you ever had a Nokia phone or a Motorola phone. Again, very much an analog technology. You could type in the phone numbers and make phone calls, and you could receive phone calls. Then the 2000s came around, and after we realized that the Y2K bug wasn't going to destroy the world, the idea of mobile computing, certainly the idea of having a laptop, having a smart device, the first of the iPhones, and a multitude of other smart devices in tablet form started to come to the forefront, which really started to enable us to move away from those traditional work methods that we've been used to leading up to the idea of modern internet, Wi-Fi, the idea of cellular data, and the ability to access applications outside of the physical office. And I guess the last part of that is, as we head into 2020 plus, the idea of virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence is certainly now what's coming to the forefront in terms of impacting our technology timeline when it comes to that corporate space. So before I go, I guess, to the next slide, does anybody have any sort of thoughts around this timeline? Maybe put some comments in the chat that our moderators can look at. That being said, I will move on to current and future work models. So if you consider the idea of remote work being the ability to be on any device, anywhere in the world at any time, that is the true thought process around remote work. It's certainly the way I work. I'm based in Australia. My head office is in Belgium, in Brussels, in Belgium. It would be a very long commute to try and get there. But certainly I'm able to do all the things that I need to do as a consequence of the technologies that are in place today. Those technologies, leading back to the previous slide, are the idea of I have a laptop, I have access to the internet, and I have access to cloud resources. Now, when I say cloud resources, I'm really talking about the idea of not being bound to any physical infrastructure in a physical office anymore. So in the traditional sense of a corporate office, we would have servers, there might be some storage, some complex networking equipment, and other things like that that would essentially run the IT within the office. In the new world of cloud, we don't need that anymore. And so most of the offices that I work with today don't have any infrastructure in them at all. So it's really no different to going into the office to access the Wi-Fi and the internet as it is to work from home and access the Wi-Fi and access the internet, because all of my applications and all of my technology is there at my disposal. Now, the benefit of that is that in the context of not having to be bound to a physical office, it also means that the access to the people that I can work with is no longer bound to a physical location. So if I think about my current team, I have staff all over the world, in Sri Lanka, India, Singapore, the Netherlands, Belgium, UK, USA, Italy, and of course here in Australia. Now, we very rarely see each other physically, but we do get together quite frequently online, and that enables us to work collectively as a team. So you can see that remote work is no longer the challenge of what it used to be because we have those technologies in place. So let me just move on to the next type of modern work, which is the idea of hybrid work. So hybrid work is basically the flexibility of A, being in the office, and B, being able to work remotely as well. And it's the same technologies at play that I mentioned before in remote work. The benefit of hybrid work over remote work is that you actually do get that physical face time, that physical interaction with other people that you won't necessarily get when you're in a fully remote environment. The benefit of that, obviously, is that you get a better relationship in place with the people that you work with. You get to know them better. You get to drink coffees with them. You can have lunch together. There are other ways to interact and build upon those, human elements that you don't necessarily have the benefit of getting to when you're in that remote work situation. I would say, hybrid work is probably one of the best models that's currently in play. And clearly it's a byproduct of the recent pandemic that the world suffered under COVID. So, certainly if you look at it and you think to yourself, well, I'm as productive remotely as I am in the office. I can do what I need to do because my tooling is still the same when I'm at home or I'm remote or I'm in the office. So you get a lot of benefits in that space. The other big thing that was quite unexpected through that pandemic period was that during COVID, the fact that most people were in a lockdown situation and bound to their homes, we created a lot less emissions within the environment, and a lot of parts of the environment were able to renew and recover as a consequence of us not necessarily causing more stress to that environment. So there's definitely a huge amount of value in the sustainability that the idea of remote work and hybrid work offers to the planet, and that should never really go unthought. It needs to be thought about quite seriously. So there's definitely those key elements that these two work models offer. I think probably the greatest challenge that we all have in both of these working models is definitely that engagement with other people. As I said before, I call them the water cooler moments. When you're in the office and you happen to get up from your desk, you go to the kitchenette, you get a glass of water, or you go and get a coffee, and you bump into somebody and you're able to have that casual interaction. It might be about work, it might not be about work, but you're formulating ideas together, and sometimes that can be lost. When you're working in these remote environments, there are of course ways to work through those, and I'll certainly talk about some of those later. Maybe just for the sake of the exercise, if it would be interesting to know how many people on this conference have actually experienced hybrid work or remote work. and what your experiences have been. So maybe if you can add something to the chat, that'd be great. We can talk about it at the end. Okay, so the next modern work model is the idea of shared workspaces. Now, this is not a new concept. The idea of shared workspaces has been around for quite some time, but it's been made a lot more viable on the basis that the need for infrastructure in offices has been significantly reduced. So again, the idea of being able to go into any office or a collaborative space, maybe hot desks or other types of unstructured office environments is critical, because as long as we have Wi-Fi and we have internet access and our resources are cloud-based, we're again able to do what we need to do and be productive and work with each other, work with clients, work with our suppliers, work with our partners. And all of those things are achievable because of that modern technology. The benefit to businesses, and I think this has come out also, again, mostly because of the pandemic, is that the need for dedicated desks, the need for dedicated spaces, because we can do hybrid working, because we can do remote working, can be significantly reduced. So there's obviously a cost benefit to business in this concept. And also, there's also the idea of reduced emissions as well, because in that sustainability space, we're also able to leverage common spaces. So those common spaces are then offset amongst a bunch of different businesses, as opposed to having an individual instance per business. So there are definitely some key benefits to this model. It also allows for a much broader collaborative space, and also gives people opportunity to meet lots of diverse people from different environments and organizations. There are some challenges in this space. Obviously, you don't have the dedicated space to maintain privacy at times. You can be caught out from that boisterous person on the other side of the room from an open plan environment. But generally speaking, it is quite a I suppose cultural opportunity to benefit from multiple organizations in common spaces. Okay, now I'll just head over to the last of the working models that I'm going to talk through, and that is the idea of the 4-day week. Now, this is not a new concept. In fact, if you go back about 10 to 12 years, the idea of the 9-day fortnight was first formulated. And that was the idea that people could essentially work a full allotment of hours within a shorter period of time. So essentially, you might work 10 hours for 4 days as opposed to working 8 hours for 5. Now, I've got a very close colleague of mine who lives in Sydney, and he works to this model, a 4-day week. And it's quite interesting talking to him, because his view is he's more productive. He also feels more rested because he's working 4 days. So that extra day to recover, rest, rejuvenate, and put yourself into a stronger mindset has actually allowed him to be far more productive in the days that he is at work. And that's made a massive difference, not just to himself personally, but also to his family. So it's something that seems to be coming up more and more, especially in the younger generations, where their focus is more on life balance and wanting to have more time. So again, this is yet another model which is also available in certain parts of the world and in certain organizations. I think the one thing about this one, unlike the others that I've spoken about, is this one isn't necessarily technology driven. This one is very much driven by the passion of individuals, or passion of workers, and what's important to them, and what they need to live in the world or within the society that they choose to be part thereof. So I guess just before I head on to talking about some of the benefits and also some of the future, does anybody have any questions that they want to put in the chat? More than happy to answer any if the moderators are happy to let me know. Okay, so I've got a question there already from Marlon. Look, I think team cohesion is actually quite interesting one, Marlon. I will definitely be talking about that in one of the next slides. But I think probably the most important thing is to just recognize the individuals, making sure that you have constant touch points, making sure that they feel like they are still part of the organization, even when they're not physically there present. But let me come to that. Let me come to that a little bit later on as well, and I'll get into a bit more depth on it. So just looking at those four models that I've discussed, here are the traditional benefits that people look to get from it. So if we take the employer or the organizational viewpoint, you've got attraction for individuals. So people are attracted to the idea of having flexible working hours, flexible schedules, the idea of being in the office or not in the office. What we find is happier people are far more productive, and not just productive, but in a sustainable way. So, as I mentioned before, you've got the environmental benefits, but you also have the human benefits as well that come with that. And then, as I mentioned before, you've got potential cost savings to operational overheads in the way you might structure your physical office. In terms of employee benefits, obviously, as I mentioned before, you've got a far greater job satisfaction, that work-life balance opportunity, and also the opportunity for other personal development. So, if you kind of think about how that might work in those models, you've got things like being output and results focused as opposed to being at a desk for 8 hours a day. You've also got from an employer point of view, access to a global talent pool, and that makes things a significantly different thought process as well. I think the other things to think about in that same space also is the idea of ensuring that the right tools are in place to enable digital collaboration and then that collective innovation that can take place. So let me just move on to, I guess, future work models. And this is probably going to overlap with some of the other presenters a little bit, I hope. But these are technologies that are not necessarily common yet within the workplace, but are probably likely to come over the next maybe five to 10 years. Virtual reality, the idea of being able to immerse yourself within a virtual office space. I think that's probably 3 to 5 years. I think that will start to turn up in workplaces in a more common way. There are certainly some industries that are already using VR. I know architecture is a big space when they're looking to build large shopping malls, skyscrapers, buildings. The idea of being able to walk through a building and see it before it's built is quite an amazing experience. I've certainly had the ability to experience VR from a sailing point of view, although that wasn't the experience Avi was referring to on my introduction. The next one is augmented reality, and that's certainly an area that is growing day by day. So the idea of being able to interact with digital technology, digital tools, while still being present, I guess I'll call it in the real world, not in virtual reality. That's going to be something that's quite fiercely going to be looked at. I think the idea of being able to put on a pair of sunglasses with augmented reality in them, and then sort of say talk to your virtual assistant and say hey, I want to get from point A to point B, and while you're walking, the map comes up in one of the lenses. It's quite a unique thought process, unique idea, and that's just touching the surface as opposed to what it could do from a day-to-day point of view. And I guess the last one, which is probably a little bit more present now at the moment, if you look at large language models, is very much the idea of embedding AI in what we do and being able to make our lives a little bit easier. I can tell you that parts of this slide pack were actually made using Microsoft Copilot. I would say to you the content was definitely mine, but in terms of its approach to helping me put the slide pack together, it was very clever in the way it was able to give me advice, make suggestions, and give me opportunities to think about how I might tackle some of these things a little bit differently. I guess the last thing I'd say on this, and probably the biggest challenge, especially when we look at these sorts of technologies, is the impacts from geopolitical influences, the impacts of regulations within industries, the impacts on privacy, the impacts on security. I think those are the areas that probably are yet to be really thought through yet, and how that might impact us from a day-to-day point of view as to how we might end up using these technologies in the future. Okay. Oh, I've got another question here from Harshi. So, yes, work-life balance and burnout. I understand that topic very, very well. In fact, I'm just about to cover that off. So just bear with me for one moment. So, typical challenges and solutions. And you've beaten me to it. So certainly, managing work-life balance, especially when you're in that remote or hybrid workspace, is very, very difficult. But what I can say is if I think about the techniques that I use, and certainly the techniques that I share with my team, it is really, really important where at all possible to, one, try and get into a routine and have set work hours. Sometimes that can be very difficult, specifically for people like myself who work in a global context and have to essentially be able to be in multiple time zones. So it's not always straightforward, and there has to be some level of flexibility. But certainly it's important to do that. The other thing I'd say is it's also very, very important to make sure you take breaks. I think one of the big things that I do is I block out times in my calendar on a daily basis to take breaks and force myself to come away from my desk, come away from my work, maybe go for a walk, enjoy the sunshine, stop and go get a cup of coffee like I would if I was in a physical office, make sure I try and take time for a break, have some lunch, and things like that. It is vitally important to try and do that. I think the other thing that's really important is to ensure that the people that you're working with as well are aware of your time zone as well, because it is critical to ensure that you find times that work for everybody. And whilst that can certainly be challenging, especially if you try and bridge 3 or 4 different time zones, and somebody's definitely going to draw the short straw. It is important to make sure that you are taking breaks and you give yourself a chance to, let your mind go, be free. Sometimes I would say, things like meditation's good. Certainly make sure you're taking time to exercise. Yoga is very good. I know that there's a lot of people out there doing all sorts of cool stuff these days. So that's really important. If I go to the next challenge, which is really around more of a business objective, and that's really around productivity. One of the fears that came from the idea of remote and hybrid work is the idea that people's productivity would suffer. Now, I can certainly say that, in my experience, that's not the case. But the reason why that's not the case is because there's a bunch of techniques that we take on and we use to ensure that we maintain our productivity. So we work closely with our teams. We set really clear expectations and goals about what needs to be done, when it needs to be done by. We're very, very critical about ensuring that our staff have the right technology. You've got to have the right applications, you've got to have the right hardware, you've got to have the right tools to be able to do the job that's being asked of you. Also find that ensuring that you've got open communications is really important. You have to be able to have that open dialogue when things are going well. You have to have that open dialogue when things are not going as well as you'd like. And you've got to be able to work through those things together to make sure that there is clarity and there is a way to move forward. I think probably the other couple of really important things to think through also is also finding a sensible way to monitor progress, whether that's a weekly update, a daily stand-up, whatever it might be that works best for you and your organization and the teams that you work with. Those techniques are absolutely critical to ensure that the outcomes are achieved. The other thing is that people shouldn't be afraid of real-time collaboration. Sending an email is the most impersonal thing you can ever do. Getting on a call with somebody, being on a video call, certainly having that interaction with people is hugely valuable and critical for everybody. So I think what I'd say there around that productivity space is be open, be flexible, and use the things that make it best for you to achieve your desired outcomes. The next one is around equity and inclusion. Now, this is very much a human relationship construct. When you're in hybrid and remote environments, it's very easy to feel isolated. In fact, I have team members today who I will talk to on a regular basis who sometimes feel that, they might be disjointed or not quite, in the loop on what's going on with others in the team. And we do our absolute best to work through those. And I'd say, probably the big ticket items that I could sort of point out in that space is it is really, really important to have structured team building. You want to have methods in place that allow you to interact regularly and build relationships with people so that during good and difficult and hard times, you can be open and honest with each other. That is absolutely essential. The other thing I'd say is you want to leverage communication tools to the best of your ability, whether that's scheduling one-on-one calls, whether that's having, team workshops, whether that's, having ad hoc conversations. Those techniques are absolutely critical. And the reason why they're critical is because in order to overcome some of these challenges around equity and inclusion, you really need to be able to build trust-based relationships. And it's important to know specifically that when you're working with somebody is that, they're there for you, you're going to be there for them, you're working to a common outcome, and your value set is tuned into, common goal. So that is absolutely critical and absolutely essential to ensure that especially is looked at in all seriousness. There's probably a need to work closely with your HR teams as well. They may also have some really good ideas and techniques for helping to ensure that those attributes and elements are taken into account. Last but not least, company culture. We all know that culture is everything. People's values, the way they work with each other, the way they see each other, being able to be together on the same journey, thriving in the same communities, are absolutely essential. So some of the things that I would say have worked really well that I've seen in this space are ensuring, first of all, that the company's core values are not just defined and communicated, but they're values that can be lived. They're things that you can do as part of your day-to-day life. They're not just a bolt-on to whatever it is you're already doing. They're genuinely there because you believe strongly in them, and you can feel a sense of belonging to those values. I think the other area is very much around ensuring that there is a program in place to prioritize employee well-being. There are a lot of challenges around mental health. There are a lot of challenges around people's feelings, especially in these unique work environments, and knowing that there's a support mechanism in place for them that's safe, where they're not going to be judged, and not just that, but they're going to be supported. It's really, really important for that to be there. The other thing I'd say also, I think it's really important to encourage social interactions. It's very easy for people to, be shy or be reserved or, hold themselves back from engaging with other people, especially if they've never met them before. I think it's important to create opportunities for people to meet, even if it's online, to ensure that you're able to break down some of those barriers. I believe that's absolutely critical to really be able to engage in that space. The other thing I'd say also is, it's important to not just recognize achievements, but also to try and celebrate those with your teams as well. When you have a win, it's important that you take the time to acknowledge it. It's important in time, to give that feedback to people as well. And I think that's absolutely critical as well. Those key elements definitely would make a huge difference, especially in terms of maintaining company culture and hopefully, growing it, hopefully making it, more prevalent as well. I see Manisha's got a great question in there, and I will definitely cover that off in the next set of slides. So just bear with me. Okay, so look, just before I go much further, do those challenges and solutions resonate with everybody? I'm assuming those of you who are working in these environments or working with these models are already experiencing some of this today. So hopefully it's not all new. Hopefully some of it's what's happening today. But I think it's important that if anybody's got any thoughts around those, please raise them. Okay, so let me talk about the trends, because I think these trends will certainly start to answer some of the other questions on the chat. So global talent. So one of the really cool things about what we do in a remote work context, or even in a hybrid work context, is that we're able to work with people anywhere in the world. As I said before, my team is hugely diverse and really, sprawled across the globe. But I'm very fortunate to have some very, skilled people, very capable people, and I guess, also blessed in a way that, that diverse group of people also gets along. It's not always, smooth sailing, but certainly, they find a way to work together because they are driven to achieve a common outcome. And I can honestly say that's not easy to find. Even in a local environment where you are bound to an office, you're not always going to find a group of people that you get along with. So, being able to tap into different cultures, different mentalities, different thought processes, different experiences, that really makes a huge difference in terms of not just the talent that you get in that mindset, but also what that does for your company culture as well. And that's something that definitely should be embraced. All right, let me just go on to the next one. So adoption of AI and automation. So I did mention this previously. I think it's really important that we are open to the idea that AI and automation is actually not replacing us. There's always been this fear or context that machines are going to take our jobs away. The reality is if you kind of look at the world we're in right now, all this technology is really doing is helping us to focus on the more important things, right? What the technology is doing is it's removing some of the mundane elements of our roles and making it easier so that we're able to focus on higher value, more strategic thought process time, more time to think about how we could do something better ways to engage with our people. I think, those key things that often get shunted to the side because we're drowning in, manual repetitive tasks. That's quite important. So I think it's more a case of, we need to go with the technology. Obviously, we need to make sure it's done in a responsible way, and that we're training and learning on how best to use it and to use it in a safe way so that it's not doing things that we don't want it to do. But I think it's important that we allow it to be part of our lives. One of the things that I always think through is if you kind of think about the world of accounting, if you go back centuries, it all started with, the idea of ledgers, written books. Those of you who may have seen movies from the 60s and 70s might remember some, wooden desks with inkwells and written pages. The idea of an abacus, because, we didn't have calculators yet. And then we moved from that type of technology into, standard calculators, scientific calculators. We moved from, written physical ledgers to spreadsheets to finance systems. Those were all leaps forward, and yet, in the world of accounting, the accountant is still there. These technologies have not replaced the need for those people. But what it has done is it's enabled them to be able to do other things with the time, and higher value things that people can, appreciate and get better value from. Now, the last one, and certainly not the most, and certainly not least, is very much, employee well-being. And I'm about to answer some of the questions in the chat. So, look, there's several things to think about here. Many of us who work, in remote environments, there is always that compulsion to try and do more, work harder, work longer. But that has a shelf life, and it's not sustainable for the individual. So ensuring that well-being is put at the forefront is absolutely critical. There are certain countries in the world where they do have legislation. Certainly, I know in Belgium they have HR laws and the concept of right to disconnect. I know that they're about to bring that type of legislation into Australia as well. And what that basically means is that just because you're working remotely or from home doesn't mean that you are there 24/7. You can certainly, excuse me, you can certainly make sure that, the time that you are working is recognized. Certainly, as I said before, block it out in your calendar. This is when I'm working. These are my working hours. And people can share that. Certainly I know within our environment, in our email environment, in our Microsoft Teams environment, you can set dedicated work hours, at which point, depending on your role, you can switch off after that point in time. I think the challenge that people do have, though, is, and where this right to disconnect and work-life balance collides, is more around when you've got set deadlines or deliverables. And those lines can become quite blurry. But to give you an idea, what we do with our teams is, if we've got a migration, let's say, on, and, people have to work on a weekend or after hours, could be long days, long nights, we do make sure that people then take time off. We do make sure that they get some of that or a good chunk of that time back, whether it's long weekends, whether it's, breaks in the middle of the week, whatever it is that works best for them. So we find, as long as we juggle and maintain, our staffing, I guess, roster, for a better thought process, so that we do have coverage, we do make sure that our people are given time and are encouraged to take that time off. I can certainly say that I have some staff who refuse to take time off, and I have the challenge of trying to convince them that it's good for them. It's a bit unique, I guess, because certainly when I was starting in industry almost 30 years ago, it was almost frowned upon to have a sick day. Now I would say to you, it's important to go and take that sick day, because if you come in and you make everybody else sick, that doesn't help. If you try and push yourself while you are sick, you're going to be sick for longer. So it is really important that people do take time to do that. I mean, some of the strategies that I use, and this is something I mentioned earlier, is I do take time during my day to take breaks. Meditation's really good. The idea of doing yoga, maybe go to the gym, maybe go out and do some gardening. I don't know what's available to people where they are, but just removing yourself from technology for a period of time is absolutely valuable in helping to do that. And I think the other thing is you've got to find that hobby or thing that you can enjoy and love doing, that actually gives you a chance to really get away from work. That thing that when you go and do it, you don't have time to think about anything but being in that moment. So definitely would say that's one of those other things. You really need to make sure that you give yourself time to do that. So I hope that answers some of those questions that are in the chat. I'll just move on. So embracing flexible working. So I just want to conclude about what we've talked about, and I suppose maybe just to give people a little bit of an idea of the thought process here. So in my time in IT, and I suspect for most of you, you'll find that you're always making change. You're always impacting other people, whether it be individuals, departments, whole organizations, communities. You're always encouraging change, and I think sometimes that change is slow, and other times that change is quite rapid. So if I think back to the original technology timeline, it was very slow for us to move from a typewriter to a personal computer. And yet, if you look at the timeline, moving from a personal computer to the idea of remote work to, let's say, virtual reality, that's happened a lot quicker. That's certainly happened a lot faster, as has the idea of, remote work, hybrid work, as a consequence of, a global pandemic forcing us to change. So I think the key messages from me before I head into the last couple of slides is be open to change, be open to the possibilities of it, maximize those opportunities that are in front of you. It's easy to fear change, but the reality is that, sometimes you have to just jump into the deep end and explore what's there in front of you. So let me just head to the last of my slides here, about just embracing flexibility and embracing the idea of these future work trends. The first one is, look, culture. Be brave, go out there, experiment, find those things that, tie you, make you feel, valued, and go get those things, right? It's really important, not just for the individuals, but for the teams that you're working in, for the people around you. And try and do it, as I said before, with balance in mind. Rome wasn't built in a day, so our deliverables aren't necessarily built in a day either. So make sure you've got that open communication. Make sure you're transparent. Make sure you're clear in your communication, ensuring that you've set reasonable expectations. The second one is the world is changing, right? You look at that digital timeline I showed you before, right? It's evolving faster than we are. What we need to do is be willing to, accept where those changes are, grow, adapt, and see the value that it offers to us and what it means for us. Really, the sky's the limit in terms of where the technology can take us. It's just about our willingness to embrace that change, go with it, and find the next thing that's really important that the technology can't do yet, so that we're always staying, in the forefront. The last one, I guess, is really more around, you know, accessing and finding talented people. You know, what I find is that, you know, if you offer people the things that are important to them, and it's not always financial, right? Um, they're always more likely to be loyal. They're always more likely to want to be with you or stay with you. And offering them those other elements, I find, makes a massive difference to their want to be part of your team or work with you. And it's not just the staff in your own organization. This could be partners, suppliers, clients. It's all bound by relationships and value. So, you know, make sure that you're building trust-based relationships. You know, I can't stress enough how important that is. Um, and that really concludes my presentation. So I guess, are there any questions? Okay, well, I think I'll be back to you.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for that insightful session. Your expertise in the field has provided us with valuable insights and food for thought. Thank you once again. Now, let's take a break.